Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, India goes to the polls in an election that will be a 6-week media marathon. The case for and against the gavel-to-gavel media coverage of the Pistorius trial in South Africa. Pro-Russian protesters target television channels in eastern Ukraine, while Kiev orders Russian TV outlets off the air. And in our web video of the week, tech kingdoms on the rise in their own Game of Thrones. The world's second most populous country and largest democracy has started going to the polls in parliamentary elections that will last more than a month. India has more news channels than any other country, and its print sector continues to grow, so the quantity of coverage is never going to be an issue. The challenger, the BJP's Narendra Modi, comes out of the state of Gujarat, and he's being marketed in many domestic media outlets as an uncorruptible economic miracle worker with a strong following among Hindu nationalists. His critics, many of whom support the ruling Congress Party and its allies, say that major media outlets have been treading lightly around Modi, particularly on a story that goes back to 2002 when he was chief minister of Gujarat and anti-Muslim riots claimed more than 1,000 lives. Some high-profile names in Indian journalism say they've lost their jobs for not climbing aboard the pro-Modi bandwagon. This is a huge media story in a pivotal country, and it will run right up until the votes are counted on May 16th. Our starting point this week is New Delhi.
The greatest show in the democratic world.
Issues are being submerged in questions about personalities.
Once upon a time in Gujarat.
The battle for Lok Sabha in 2014 is widely expected to be a personality clash.
But it is becoming about one personality, one person.
Mr. Modi said he would never do anything with ill intent.
By projecting Narendra Modi, they have created a personality cult around this man.
Everything Narendra Modi does gets blanket coverage on television.
The mainstream media in India has misrepresented, demonized Modi on false charges.
So the role of the media in this election is huge. It's having a determining impact.
Starting with the numbers, which are tough to get your head around. By our count, India has 87 television news channels. 16 of them are national, broadcasting in Hindi and English. The rest are regional all-news channels operating in too many languages to mention. The print sector is every bit as crowded. Competition is almost always good for journalism. However, in the case of India in general, and this election in particular, one could argue voters actually suffer from an unhealthy amount of competition in their media.
They are all trying to cover the same story, and that story is really about personalities. It has become a kind of presidential election. It is not so much issue-oriented, it is personality-oriented. And because the competition is so fierce, they are increasingly lowering the bar of discourse. So you see a lot of what may be described as foxification of television news. So the model seems to be Fox News in the United States, which is famous internationally for shouting matches.
The Indian mainstream media has a huge role in these elections, because in these elections we're seeing a rise in the education levels of the voter. Urbanization in India is increasing by leaps and bounds. Television penetration, newspaper penetration is massively increasing. So the role of the mainstream media is very, very high, particularly in terms of the kind of television debates, both in the English language as well as the regional languages.
And the nature of media is very reflective of the sort of class structure of our society, simply that the English language elite dominates discourse. In the same fashion, the English language media in this country shapes discourse. If you look at the numbers of vernacular regional media, the Hindi language media is much larger than the English media. But the fact is that the discourse starts from the top.
That discourse centers less on the 10-year-old coalition government led by the left-leaning Congress Party and its candidate for Prime Minister, Rahul Gandhi, than it does on the challenger, Narendra Modi, of the more conservative BJP. The BJP is considered the pro-business party, and the businessmen who own Indian news channels are, depending on whom you believe, either reflecting the population's appetite for change or nurturing it. Neutral observers of Indian media say they have seen a growing pro-Modi bias on the air and in print in the run-up to these elections. Madhu Kishwar is not one of them. She's a pro-Modi journalist who maintains the candidate is a victim, not a beneficiary, of media bias, particularly over a story from 2002, the deadly anti-Muslim riots in the state that Modi governed.
My book is a detailed study, and there are 2 more books to follow, of how the mainstream media in India has misrepresented, demonized Modi on false charges. If anything, he did all he could to control the riots, acted in the most responsible way, but they have deliberately smeared him for partisan political purposes. Now, there is of course concern amongst some media houses that if this man actually becomes Prime Minister, are they going to face trouble? But even so, I don't think the BJP has it in them to exercise any pressure.
Modi has had a problem with the media.
Blaming him squarely.
Particularly with the liberal media in India. Because although the Supreme Court of India has absolved him of direct responsibility for what happened in 2002, there is a perception among large sections of Indian liberal media that Modi is a polarizing figure. Sections of Indian liberal media have been, one would say, less than fair to Modi on that count.
However, it does not take an exhaustive search to find examples of a growing shift in the Indian media in Modi's direction. The candidate does few interviews, and the 2 he recently has done, one with a regional channel in Rajasthan, the other with one of the smaller national channels, both featured a series of softball questions and turned into virtual Modi monologues. Then there's the story of Open, a prominent current affairs weekly, and Hartosh Singhbal, who was the political editor there until he says he started digging into a story about this election and lost his job.
I was writing articles which were critical both of the Congress and the BJP. I was told that whatever I was writing was earning political enemies for the owner of my group. I resisted because journalistically I've done nothing wrong. But after I have left, the magazine has done a 180 degrees shift in how it views the Indian political scene. Clearly, there has been a change in alliances, and the owner, I think in this case, has also decided to back the winning horse.
Balls is not an isolated case. CNN-IBN is one of many channels owned by a group called Network 18. A few months ago, Caravan magazine published an article quoting unnamed sources within the group who said that pressure was coming from above, that all Network 18's media outlets, including CNN-IBN, should go easy on Modi and the BJP.
As far as CNN-IBN is concerned at the moment, there is no interference whatsoever. But I would say that as far as corporate-owned media is concerned, there is a tendency to root for change, an inclination on the part of the business elite to want a leader, to want a politician who is business friendly. There's nothing ultimately morally wrong with that. Where it does possibly become morally wrong is if it translates into interference on fair journalism. So far it's not happening, but we are all owned by corporate entities. So corporate-owned media does tend to root for Narendra Modi because he is seen as business-friendly.
A leader seen as business-friendly, and media outlets that are prepared to be friendly in return. Because media outlets are businesses too, and nobody has more of them, particularly on the TV side, than India. Our Global Village Voice is now on the Indian media and their coverage of the parliamentary elections.
Narendra Modi has had a very antagonistic relationship with the Indian media. So this time the BJP has made a very conscious effort to focus a lot on digital media as well as social media. So what this does is that BJP can essentially write its own narrative now. So they can write their own narrative on what Gujarat has been all about. They can write their own narrative about what Modi has been all about. So it's tough to say whether all these tactics would work out for the BJP or not. But we do know that internet penetration in India is only about 20%, so there are many more battles to be won by the BJP.
It is actually debatable how much influence would mainstream media have on these elections compared to the previous ones. It's been reported that more than a third of news channels are owned directly by politicians or politically affiliated business people. Cable distribution system, the situation is even more acute. Almost 60% of them, or slightly more than 60%, are actually owned by local politicians. The second is very unfortunate and widely reported instances of paid media over the last few years. And the third is the emergence of social media as a very strong and a serious contender to mainstream media in terms of an alternative narrative.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. The media side of the Crimea-Ukraine story is getting ugly, with TV stations being targeted and their journalists threatened. On April 7th, an armed gang stormed a channel called ATN TV in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, ransacking it, destroying broadcasting equipment, and telling journalists they were quote-unquote fired. A news website, Charter 79, reported that the protesters also went after ATN's transmission tower. It wasn't a one-off. That same day, armed men reportedly tried to enter the newsroom of OGTRK TV in Donetsk, as well as the newsroom of IRTA TV in Lugansk. The attacks came after a series of pro-Russian protests in eastern Ukraine. Last month, Ukraine's media regulator based in Kiev ordered all cable providers to stop transmitting Russian state-controlled TV channels, some of which have portrayed Ukraine as a country overrun by neo-Nazis and on the brink of collapse. In the Philippines, an outspoken journalist has been murdered, and according to reports in the local media, she implicated a local policeman just before she died. On April 6th, two men entered the home of Rubelita Garcia in Cavite, a province just south of the capital, Manila. Garcia was a reporter with the tabloid newspaper Remate, as well as the host of a radio talk show.
And the killing of
journalists are linking the murder to her work. She often focused on corruption within the Cavite Police Department. Local media have reported that her final words included the name of a policeman with whom her publisher says she recently had an argument. The New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists ranks the Philippines as the second deadliest country in the world for media workers, behind only Iraq. The CPJ's Asia specialist, Bob Dietz, said, "Until the perpetrators of Garcia's murder and those of other journalists in the country are brought to justice, the deadly cycle of impunity will inevitably continue." A senior Venezuelan television journalist has been reported kidnapped in the capital, Caracas. Nairobi Pinto is the chief correspondent for the news channel Globovisión. Her father says that she was taken by masked gunmen on April 6th outside her home. He has appealed to the kidnappers to see sense and release his daughter. Pinto's Globovisión colleagues held a mass praying for her safe return, and the channel's executives urged people talking about the case over social media to do so responsibly to avoid further endangering her life. No motive has yet been established, but kidnappings for ransom are common in the country. It's been a challenging time for media workers in Venezuela. Many have come under fire covering the political protests there against the Maduro government, and according to media rights groups, they've also been harassed and detained by government security forces. South Africans were riveted this past week watching Paralympic sprint champion Oscar Pistorius take the stand at his murder trial in Pretoria. Pistorius has admitted to shooting his girlfriend, Rhea Steenkamp, last year, but claims he mistook her for an intruder. He is one of South Africa's best-known athletes, a global brand. And before the trial began, TV stations in the country went to court where they won the right to broadcast the bulk of the trial live. That's never happened before in South Africa, and the judge who made that ruling said that the world needed to see that the country's legal system treats the rich and famous the same way it does the poor and vulnerable. The defense has argued that all that media attention has jeopardized Pistorius' chance of getting a fair trial. The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead now on the case and the coverage.
South Africans are used to images like these outside the courts. The media scrambling for position, desperately trying to get a shot of the accused before they disappear into the courtroom. But in the case of Oscar Pistorius, the world's most famous Paralympic athlete who's accused of murdering his girlfriend, Rhea Steenkamp, that hasn't been entirely necessary. A landmark ruling has allowed the trial to be broadcast live, apart from when the evidence is deemed too graphic or when witnesses do not wish to appear on TV, in which case they can be heard but not seen.
We as South African journalists had a particular responsibility to tell the story of the Oscar Pistorius trial and to tell it well. And for a very long time, the judiciary was reluctant to grant permission to journalists to cover trials in this way, with cameras in court.
The fact that it's being broadcast live has raised the bar, because you can't now get away as a journalist just by telling the public what happened in court. We can all see it and we can hear it.
I just feel like everyone's a scavenger. Everyone's running after the next big thing. It's become so desperate now.
But I've just been informed that they're showing this witness's face on the TV as we speak. And there's been a court order that should not be allowed.
That the media have almost to an extent forgotten the role that they're supposed to play in this.
I am warning the media, if you do not behave, you are not going to be treated with soft gloves.
And instead they are competing for attention.
Oscar Pistorius came to fame as the Blade Runner after riding his prosthetic limbs to gold in 3 Paralympic Games. He is a household name in South Africa. Reeva Steenkamp was a model and a reality TV celebrity, so there was already a lot of media attention around the couple. And that level of fame has made its way into the athlete's defense. His lawyer, Barry Rue, has argued that the media's obsession with this case means that Pistorius won't get a fair trial, and that broadcasting the proceedings live could lead to witnesses tailoring their evidence, which he implied in the cross-examination of a state witness.
What do you mean you saw that, Mr. Fresco?
It's been on Twitter.
So you've been following that part of the evidence? I think we have to face the reality that in a high-profile trial like this, whether you are a witness who sees this on television or hears it on the radio, or you follow it on Twitter or read it in a newspaper the next day, you can easily get access to another witness's testimony. Now, one, televising the trial doesn't add to that problem. If it's a problem, it's there already. Secondly, the law doesn't say that just because you have heard another person's evidence that you are suddenly a bad witness.
The verdict in this case will come from the presiding judge. South Africa abolished jury trials 45 years ago. The concern in the apartheid era was that juries, which were all white at the time, would be racially biased. A judge is supposed to be above all of that and immune to speculation in the media. However, analysts say that in South Africa's media, which can be judgmental, Pistorius' guilt was a foregone conclusion. The concern now is that the tone of that coverage could undermine the judge's ruling in the minds of the public if the verdict is not guilty.
Oscar Pistorius has definitely received a trial by media before this began, and we've seen it in our own research. Just after his bail application and the incident itself, we saw that Oscar Pistorius was portrayed even worse than Al-Qaeda.
I don't believe that the media has tried Pistorius. I don't think it is within the ambit of the media to do so. I think the story that Pistorius has put forward is a story that some people find difficult to believe. That does not mean that the media has tried Pistorius. That means that the public have made those decisions based on what was presented initially in the bail application in court.
The producers at one of the top independent production companies in South Africa looked at the Oscar Pistorius story and saw an opportunity. They launched the Oscar Pistorius Trial Channel,
a channel designed for one purpose,
which has been broadcasting the court proceedings live from day one.
Now that the public is being exposed to that through this channel, people should understand what the criminal justice system actually does mean and how well it actually works. And as much as we're very quick to criticize the moment that somebody doesn't get put away behind bars, what we forget is that there's actually a defense case.
Why I put it to you so desperate.
That comes across to create doubt amongst the judge and within the court.
We're the one channel that can carry the entire trial unedited. All the other channels have other responsibilities to cover other stories as and when they occur. Our single focus is this trial. So we're doing a great deal of analytical work with it, and I think that that brings the audience a degree of understanding that they possibly wouldn't get in other formats.
But only a select audience. Subscription costs to the channel are almost 300 Rand a month, which is around $30 American.
The channel that's dedicated to Oscars is a DSTV channel, which is obviously a satellite television, service provider. And so we have like this elitist group of people who can access that, and the channel is very popular amongst them. But to use that as a measure for how the overall public is getting this information, I think, is not only unfair, it's silly almost, because they can't access that channel.
One of the key talking points to emerge in the media during this trial has been the performance of the South African Police Service, which has been slammed for failing to properly secure the crime scene. The same police force that is currently under investigation for opening fire in 2012 on a group of striking miners in Marikana, killing 34 of them. However, the media attention given to police failings in the case of one killing, Reeva Steenkamp, compared to an alleged cover-up in the killing of 34 people, was summed up by South Africa's leading satirist, Zaphira. And that's not the only important story being overshadowed by this murder trial.
In South Africa, we've seen the focus on Oscar Pistorius, and yet these service delivery issues and these protests that have been going on in the background, in addition to the Marikana issues and the strikes of the mines, people don't even know about that. There was flooding in some of the provinces. People didn't even know that there was flooding unless you were probably driving through the floods. There's a majority portion here that are suffering or losing out, and we've ignored their plight and focused on one small little issue that happens to be one person that's got a lot of fame and a lot of credibility in international media.
I don't agree with that at all. I think, first of all, this trial has enormous public interest. What is important about having cameras in the court is that it allows justice to be seen to be done. And it's a constitutional imperative that justice is seen to be done.
No one can question the need for justice to be seen to be done in South Africa, for all to be seen as equal in the eyes of the law. But when the media focuses on one case involving a famous athlete and his model girlfriend, in a country where on average 43 people are murdered every day, the vast majority of which go unreported, equality in the eyes of the South African media is a long way off.
More Global Village Voices now on the coverage of the Pistorius trial in Pretoria.
Now, the court ruling allowing cameras into the courtroom has meant that we've actually had a 24-hour news channel here screening the trial. Very few South Africans before the trial knew a huge amount about how courts worked, how the justice system worked. Now all of that's changing. And coupled with that, the justice system itself, it's very much in the spotlight and has to perform.
In South Africa, concern over the coverage of the Oscar Pistorius trial isn't so much that the coverage is trivializing the trial itself, but rather that other important issues are being made to feel trivial and are falling to the wayside. This trial also comes in a country where 2,500 women are murdered by their intimate partners each year. Activists have warned that because, as the media, we are focusing simply on a celebrity who shot his model girlfriend, we're really losing an important opportunity with this trial to talk about the issue of intimate partner violence in South Africa.
Finally, if you've never seen the television fantasy drama Game of Thrones, this next video may be lost on you. The series, made for HBO in the US and broadcast in 50 countries, is having a cultural impact well beyond America. Some in the news media have turned its title into a metaphor for high-stakes political conflicts like the showdown in Crimea and power struggles within the Chinese government. Just as the fourth series goes to air, a Canadian-based social media management hub called Hootsuite has turned out a parody of the opening title sequence, where medieval noble houses and landmarks have been replaced by 21st century tech giants battling it out in their own fight for social media supremacy. It's called A Game of Social Thrones, with the warring kingdoms of House Facebook, House Google, and House Twitter, and it's our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.